Beneath the shimmer of 1,000 chandeliers, the great ballroom of Blackthorn Hall swelled with laughter and violins. Velvet gowns whispered against marble, jewels flickered like captive stars, and the scent of roses mingled with candle wax. Yet amid the splendor stood Lady Evelyn Hartwell, her gloved hands trembling around a crystal glass she had long forgotten to sip from. She was the evening's centerpiece, the newly betrothed of the Duke of Blackthorn, a man whose name carried both reverence and fear, but she felt more like a statue placed for admiration and pity than a woman promised to love. He stood across the room, speaking to a foreign ambassador, his back straight, expression calm, the very image of English nobility. To Evelyn, he looked carved from winter itself. The Duke's gaze passed over her once, polite, assessing, empty. That single glance burned more than a dozen cruel whispers could, and there were whispers aplenty. "They say he accepted her out of obligation," murmured a young lady near the punch bowl. "Her father's debts, you know. Pity the girl, plain as porridge." "She looks terrified," another replied, fanning herself with mock sympathy. "Can you blame her?" The Duke's last fiancé fled to the continent before the bans were read. Evelyn lowered her eyes, her cheeks warming though the room was cold. She had been raised to endure society's scrutiny, yet nothing had prepared her for this, being adored in public and unloved in private. Her engagement had been announced in the Morning Gazette with grand phrases about alliance and honor, but no one mentioned the quiet ache that settled in her chest each time she caught him looking away. A string quartet struck a softer tune. The Duke approached at last, offering his hand. "Lady Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth but without warmth. She placed her fingers lightly in his, and together they stepped into the dance. Around them, silk swirled and eyes followed, hungry for the slightest hint of affection or discord. He guided her perfectly, as if precision could replace tenderness. "You dance well, Your Grace," she managed. "You've been well taught," he replied, eyes fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder. The words, though civil, sliced through the fragile hope she had guarded since the engagement was arranged. She tried again, quietly. "I hope I will make you proud." He hesitated, a pause so slight most would have missed it, then said, "Pride is a luxury of the heart, Lady Evelyn. Duty, however, is constant." Her breath faltered. Around them, laughter and applause rippled, but she heard only the hollow echo of his indifference. When the dance ended, he bowed precisely, escorting her back to her chaperone before withdrawing once more into the company of diplomats. The crowd resumed its rhythm, though the light seemed dimmer, the air thicker. Outside, thunder murmured, rolling over the city like distant drums. Evelyn escaped to the terrace, her satin slippers whispering against stone. Cool rain began to fall, the scent of wet roses rising around her. She let the droplets touch her face, unable to tell if the dampness upon her cheeks was from the sky or her own heart. Behind her, a voice intruded, sharp and amused. "I hear the Duke hardly speaks to her. Imagine being wed to a man so cold." Evelyn turned slightly, seeing two women through the terrace doors, Lady Beaumont and her cousin, both glittering in cruel delight. "She's lucky, some would say," the cousin replied. "A title, a fortune, even if he never shares her bed." The laughter that followed was delicate, poisonous, and unforgettable. Evelyn's gloved hands tightened on the railing until her knuckles blanched. The rain intensified, masking her quick breaths. Inside, the orchestra struck up another waltz. The Duke was dancing again, this time with the daughter of a viscount. Young, radiant, her laughter as bright as her diamonds. Evelyn watched them through the blurred glass and felt something inside her quietly break. When she finally returned to the ballroom, her expression was composed, her spine perfectly straight. She smiled at those who approached, even at those who mocked her, as her governess had once taught. Never let them see you bleed. Near midnight, the guests began to leave. She found the Duke in the vestibule, preparing to depart for his estate. Summoning every ounce of courage, she approached him. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I wish to thank you for hosting such a splendid evening." "It was an honor." He inclined his head. The honor is mutual, Lady Evelyn. Society expects such occasions. Her smile faltered. And what do you expect, my lord? For the first time that evening, he looked at her properly. There was a flicker, regret perhaps, or fatigue, but it vanished as quickly as it came. I expect that we shall both fulfill our obligations, he replied. Duty requires many things, and affection is seldom one of them. The words struck her harder than any gossip. Before she could respond, he bowed and departed into the rain, his carriage wheels splashing through puddles until the sound faded into the night. Evelyn stood alone in the entrance hall, the golden light glancing off her pale features. Around her, servants extinguished candles, the air thick with fading perfume and wilted flowers. She felt as though the grand evening had been nothing more than a play, and she its unwilling heroine. Later, in her chamber, she removed the diamond necklace her father had insisted she wear, its weight finally gone. In the mirror, her reflection seemed a stranger, elegant, yes, but hollow-eyed. The music from the ballroom lingered faintly in her ears, the melody twisted with melancholy. A knock came. Her maid entered, carrying a folded shawl left behind in the ballroom. It was the Duke's, my lady. He asked that it be returned. Evelyn took it, surprised. The fabric was still warm from his touch, faintly scented of rain and cedar. For a foolish moment, her heart betrayed her with a rush of hope. But she quickly folded it away, placing it beside the dying embers of the fire. "Thank you, Clara," she murmured. "You may go." When she was alone again, she sat by the window, watching the rain thread down the glass. The night stretched endlessly before her, filled with ghosts of laughter and the ache of unspoken words. In the courtyard below, the last carriage wheels vanished into the mist. Somewhere beyond that fog rode the man she was to marry, and she wondered if he had any idea how deeply his indifference wounded her. She pressed her palm to the cold window pane, whispering to the dark, "If duty is all that binds us, then what is to become of my heart?" The storm answered softly, a sigh across the rooftops, carrying her question into the night. It was a question without reply, but one that would soon stir a chain of events neither of them could have foreseen. The weeks that followed the engagement ball settled over Lady Evelyn like a fog that refused to lift. The rain that had begun that night seemed to have followed her into the countryside, cloaking Hartwell Manor in endless gray. Each morning she sat by the window of her drawing room, her embroidery untouched, her eyes tracing the garden's bare branches. London's chatter had faded into silence here, replaced by the steady ticking of the clock and the distant toll of the village church bell. Yet even in the quiet, she could not escape the echo of the Duke's words. Duty requires many things, and affection is seldom one of them. Letters from London arrived daily, addressed to her father or the household steward, but never for her. Each envelope that bore the blackthorn seal sent her pulse fluttering with hope, only to die when she realized it contained instructions, not sentiment. The Duke's correspondence was precise, impersonal, and painfully courteous. He wrote of estate matters and wedding arrangements, but never of her. His handwriting was elegant and distant, each loop of ink like a wall she could not climb. To occupy herself, Evelyn began painting again, returning to a small studio her late mother had once used. The scent of oil and turpentine filled the air as she worked. Her brush captured not faces but emotions. Rain on glass, the emptiness of corridors, a single chair beside a cold hearth. It was in this solitude that she began to feel both freer and lonelier than she had ever known. Then, one morning in early spring, a carriage arrived bearing a small parcel wrapped in ivory paper. The servant who delivered it bowed deeply. "From London, my lady." "No, no." Evelyn's heart thudded. She dismissed the maid and carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside lay a silver locket, delicately engraved with a rose and a single violet pressed within, her favorite flower. She stared at it in disbelief. No letter accompanied it, no signature, no clue, yet her heart whispered the name she dared not speak aloud. She opened the locket again and again throughout the day, as if expecting words to appear inside. Could it truly be from him? He was not a man given to sentimental gestures. Perhaps it was a sign, an apology too restrained for ink. Hope bloomed where despair had long sat. That evening, she wore the locket as she dined alone, touching it when she felt her thoughts drift toward him. But in the cruel way of society, even a glimmer of hope can turn into a weapon. 3 days later, Clara, her maid, entered the room pale and trembling. "My lady," she whispered, "Lady Beaumont has written from London. They say people are talking." Evelyn looked up from her letters. "Talking of what?" "Of you, my lady. They claim you sent yourself the locket, to make it appear the Duke still favors you." The word struck like ice water. "That's absurd." Clara nodded miserably. "But they say one of the shopkeepers in London swore you ordered such a piece last month." Evelyn's breath caught. Of course, a locket she had admired in a shop window weeks ago, before leaving London. She had lingered too long, and someone had noticed. Now, malicious tongues had bound that innocent moment into scandal. By evening, the rumor had reached every parlor between Mayfair and Belgravia. The fragile image of her quiet dignity began to crack. The Duke's fiancé, they said, was a desperate woman, fabricating affection where none existed. In London, Adrian Blackthorne heard of it over brandy at his club. "A pity," murmured one of his acquaintances, "to see a lady stoop so low for attention. You might have chosen better, Blackthorne." Adrian's jaw tightened, his hand tightening around the glass until the amber liquid trembled. "Be careful," he said quietly, his tone carrying the steel of command. "Lady Evelyn is soon to be my wife." The man laughed nervously and changed the subject, but Adrian heard nothing else that night. The rumor unsettled him, not because of the insult to his name, but because he knew, deep down, that it was his coldness that had allowed such cruelty to thrive. He had given her no warmth to protect her with, no shield of public affection. Duty had built walls around him, but they were beginning to feel like a prison. That night, rain lashed against the tall windows of Blackthorne House. Adrian stood by the hearth, the unopened post scattered on his desk. The memory of her face at the engagement ball haunted him, her eyes full of hope he had not deserved. He remembered her small, gloved hand in his, trembling yet steadfast. It was not indifference he had felt then, but fear of needing someone, of being seen as human in a world that prized composure above all else. Before dawn, he made his decision. Orders were given, the carriage readied. He would go to her, not as a duke fulfilling obligation, but as a man seeking to make amends. In the countryside, the day began with low clouds and restless wind. Evelyn tried to distract herself by walking through the garden, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. She passed the budding roses, the pond where swans glided silently, and the row of young birches her mother had once planted. The silver locket hung heavy against her heart, now more a burden than a comfort. When the distant sound of hooves broke through the air, she turned instinctively toward the lane. A rider appeared, dark against the pale horizon. Her breath stilled as the figure drew closer. The horse's mane flashed white, the rider's coat whipped by the wind. She knew that bearing, that resolute stillness, even in motion. It was him. Adrian dismounted before the manor steps, rain and mud spattering his boots. For a moment he only looked at her, as if the sight of her in daylight had undone every word he had prepared. She stood motionless, half afraid to breathe. "My lord," she said finally, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You are far from London." "I'm exactly where I should have been," he answered. His voice was low, roughened by the ride, and by something else she could not yet name. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything unspoken. Then he reached into his coat and drew out the locket, her locket. "This," he said, "was meant to speak for me. I see now it has done you more harm than good." Evelyn's eyes widened. "It was from you?" "Yes." His gaze faltered, the mask of nobility cracking. "I thought it safer than words." Something inside her twisted, a mingling of relief, anger, and sorrow. "Words, your grace, can wound or heal. Silence does both." For a moment, neither moved. The wind sighed through the bare trees, scattering rain across the steps. Then he bowed his head slightly, not as a duke, but as a man seeking forgiveness. "I came to make that right," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him, searching for sincerity in the eyes she had once believed incapable of warmth. And for the first time, she saw not the Duke of Blackthorn, but Adrian, the man beneath the title, uncertain yet yearning. The distance between them was only a few steps, but it felt like the width of the world. She did not close it, not yet. Instead, she turned toward the open door of the manor and said softly, "Then come inside, my lord. The rain is cold." He followed her in without a word, leaving the storm to rage behind them. And though neither of them knew it yet, something had already begun to change. The manor was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that carries the weight of unsaid things. A fire burned low in the hearth, painting the drawing room in soft amber light. Evelyn sat across from the Duke, the distance between them filled with flickering shadows and cautious breath. Neither had spoken much since he arrived. His sudden presence had unsettled the rhythm of her solitude. The rain had ceased, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves. She poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, her movements graceful but restrained. "You must be weary, my lord," she said, not looking up. "The road from London is long." "I've ridden farther with less reason," Adrian replied, his voice low, his gloved hands resting on his knees. "But tonight, I find the distance heavier than any I've known." Her hands paused mid-motion. "And what reason brings you here, if I may ask?" He hesitated, studying the steam rising between them. "A scandal that should never have reached your name, and a truth I have long refused to face." Evelyn's eyes lifted to his. The firelight caught the flecks of gold in her gaze, revealing a quiet strength beneath her gentleness. "Truths are like storms, your grace," she murmured. "They do not spare anyone once loosed." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Then perhaps it is time I let one break." The fire cracked softly. For a long moment, he said nothing, as if choosing his words with care. "When my father died," he began, "I inherited not just a title, but a legacy of control. He used to say affection was a weakness in men of rank, that a duke's heart must serve his duty, not his desire. I believed him, and so, when I was told I must wed you, a woman of grace and breeding, yet without scandal, I agreed. But I did not see you, Evelyn. Not truly. I saw only what was expected of me." She listened in silence, her heart tightening at the honesty in his tone. It was not an apology yet, but it was a beginning. "When I first saw you at the ball," he continued, "you smiled. Everyone else in that room smiled for advantage. Yours was the only one that did not ask for anything. It frightened me." Her breath caught. "Frightened you?" "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, the firelight drawing lines of weariness along his face. "Because it meant I might one day need something real. And needing is not something men like me are taught to do." Evelyn's gaze softened. For all his rank and composure, she saw in him the loneliness of a boy who had never been allowed to speak of tenderness. "And yet," she said quietly, "you sent me the locket." "I did," he admitted. "It was the only way I knew to reach you without breaking my own rules. I thought if I sent it silently, it would not feel like a confession." Her eyes glistened. "And what would you have confessed?" He met her gaze, the air between them taut with something fragile. "That from the moment I saw you turn toward the window that night, the music fading, the chandeliers burning low, I wished to understand you, and I despised myself for it." Evelyn's pulse quickened. The words were raw, unpolished, and painfully sincere. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I despise only the silence that kept me from saying so sooner." The admission lingered in the air, heavy and electric. Evelyn set her teacup down, her fingers trembling slightly. "You have a gift for saying what a heart wishes to hear only when it is half broken." Adrian exhaled, the faintest trace of regret shadowing his face. "Then let me mend what I have broken." She looked at him for a long while, her eyes searching for deceit and finding none. "You think words can mend trust, my lord?" "No," he said quietly, "but perhaps they can begin to." The silence that followed was not cold. It pulsed with unspoken longing. The rain began again, soft and steady against the window panes, as if the world itself leaned closer to listen. After a moment, Evelyn rose and walked to the hearth, standing before the flames. The locket hung at her throat, glinting faintly. "Do you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I used to dream of our life together? Before the world turned us into names and obligations. I imagined laughter in these rooms, not echoes. I imagined," she stopped herself, the words catching, "but dreams are foolish things." Adrian stood slowly, his footsteps quiet against the carpet. "Then let us be fools, if it means we may start again." She turned toward him, her composure faltering. "Do you mean that?" "Truly." He closed the space between them until the firelight flickered across both their faces. "I mean every word." His voice deepened, threaded with emotion he could no longer restrain. "I've spent years hiding behind titles and expectation. But when I heard them mock you, when I realized what my silence had cost, I understood that I would trade every ounce of reputation for the chance to earn your forgiveness." Her lips parted in astonishment, and for the first time since he arrived, she saw not the Duke of Blackthorn, but the man she had once hoped he could be. "Forgiveness," she murmured, "is not given, it's lived." "Then I shall live it," he said. The firelight shimmered between them. He reached out, hesitated, then gently brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was tentative, reverent, as if he feared she might vanish at any moment. Evelyn's breath shuddered. No grand declarations, no sweeping gestures, just one touch, fragile and trembling, was enough to unravel the walls she'd built around her heart. "You speak as if you have changed," she said softly. "Perhaps I'm only beginning," he replied. "But if change begins with truth, then hear mine." His hand fell away, but his eyes held hers with steady devotion. "You are not a duty. You are not a name on a document. You are," he paused, the words escaping him like a confession to the heavens. "You are the first piece I have ever wanted to keep." Her throat tightened, and tears welled unbidden. "And yet," she whispered, "peace and I have never been well acquainted." He smiled faintly. "Then let me introduce you properly." The soft laugh that escaped her lips was half disbelief, half relief. The tension broke like morning light over mist. And yet, beneath the gentleness of that moment, both felt the gravity of what it meant. This fragile truce born from confession and regret. The clock struck 10. The world outside remained dark and rain-swept, but inside, the air seemed to breathe again. Evelyn stepped back, composing herself. "You should rest, my lord. The guest chambers are prepared." He inclined his head, though his gaze lingered as if reluctant to let her go. "Thank you," he said quietly. And Evelyn, she met his eyes. "I meant what I said. All of it. For a heartbeat." Neither moved. Then she turned away, her hand brushing the locket once more. "Then let tomorrow prove it," she said softly. Adrian bowed his head, the faintest glimmer of hope flickering in his chest. As he left the room, Evelyn watched him go, her heart divided between caution and yearning. When the door finally closed, she sank into the chair by the fire, pressing the cool silver of the locket to her lips. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to whisper into the silence. Perhaps the heart remembers what pride forgets. And somewhere down the hall, the Duke paused, as if he had heard her through the stillness. Morning broke with a pale, silvery light that spilled gently across the countryside. The storm had passed, leaving the earth washed clean and glistening. Birds sang cautiously in the hedgerows, as if unsure the tempest had truly ended. At Blackthorn Manor, the air held that strange calm which follows great upheaval, a quiet that felt like a hell breath. Evelyn stood by her window, her hands clasped before her as she watched the mist rise from the fields. It was the same view she had gazed upon for months, yet today it seemed changed, touched by something tender and uncertain. She had not slept. The Duke's confession echoed in her thoughts, threading through dreams she hadn't meant to have. His voice, low, remorseful, sincere, lingered in her like a melody she couldn't forget. She had wanted to doubt him, to guard herself behind the walls he'd once helped build, but something in his eyes the night before had undone her. That look, quiet and desperate, had carried no trace of arrogance, only longing and repentance. Still, she told herself, remorse was not love, though perhaps it was the beginning of it. A knock at the door stirred her from thought. "Enter," she said softly. The maid stepped in, curtsied, and handed her a letter sealed with black wax. Evelyn's heart stilled when she saw the crest, the blackthorn emblem, the Duke's seal. For a moment she simply stared, then carefully broke it open. The letter was brief, written in the Duke's precise hand. "My dearest Evelyn, I will not ask to be forgiven in words, but in deeds. There is something you must see before you decide what remains between us. Meet me at the Rose Gardens before noon. Adrian." Evelyn folded the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. She hesitated, torn between fear of another disappointment and the fragile hope that perhaps, at last, he meant what he said. The morning sun climbed higher, scattering light across the polished floor. With a steadying breath, she donned her cloak and stepped into the corridor. Outside, the world smelled of rain and renewal. The gardens shimmered, dew clinging to every leaf. When she reached the rose archway, she saw him waiting. The Duke stood by the fountain, his dark coat unbuttoned, the wind stirring his hair. He turned as she approached, and for a moment neither spoke, the air between them alive with the weight of what had been left unsaid. "You came," he said finally, his voice soft with both relief and disbelief. "You asked me to," she replied. "What is it you wished me to see?" He gestured toward the far end of the garden, where a small marble bench had been newly placed beneath a canopy of white roses. Upon it lay a single book, worn, bound in leather, its pages gilded at the edge. Evelyn frowned slightly, curiosity stirring. "I found it among my mother's belongings," he said, walking beside her. "Her journals." She wrote of the mistakes she made trying to live by society's terms, how she silenced her heart to fit within her duty. "I read every page last night, and in doing so, I realized I've spent my life repeating her sorrow." Evelyn touched the cover gently. "Why show me this?" "Because I want no more secrets between us," he said quietly. "I've hidden behind pride, behind my father's teachings, and all it's earned me is a life half-lived. You deserve more than that. You deserve truth, not pretense." She looked at him, seeing a man stripped of the armor he had always worn. "And what truth is that, Adrian?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "That I love you, not as one fulfills a vow or appeases society, but as a man who has finally learned what love is. You are the heartbeat I never knew I had." The words struck her with their simplicity. No grand gestures, no elaborate phrases, only truth. It left her breathless. She turned slightly away, her eyes glistening in the morning light. "And if I say I cannot trust you again, then I will spend my life earning it," he said, "not through promises, but through patience." Her lips trembled. "You speak like a poet, my lord, but poets often vanish when the verses end." "Then I shall never stop writing," he answered gently. A silence fell, not the cold silence of estrangement, but the delicate one before something new is born. The breeze carried the scent of roses, and a petal brushed her hand. Evelyn looked down, remembering how love had once bloomed between them before pride had torn it apart. "Do you remember," she said softly, "the evening you first gave me this locket?" He nodded. "At the winter ball. You wore blue silk. I remember because the moment I saw you, I forgot the rest of the room existed." Her lips curved faintly, half in disbelief. "And yet, days later, you spoke to me as though I were a stranger." His face darkened with regret. "I was a coward. I feared what others would say if they saw me softened by you." She studied him, the gentleness in his expression, the humility in his tone. For once, there was no distance between the man and his title. "And what do you fear now?" "Only that you will walk away." The words were so quiet, she almost missed them. Evelyn's eyes filled, not with pain this time, but with the tenderness of a heart that dared to believe again. "Then you have nothing to fear," she whispered. He reached for her hand, slowly, reverently. When she did not pull away, he lifted it to his lips. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and in that fragile moment, every wall between them fell away. "You once told me," she said, her voice barely audible, "that affection was a weakness." He smiled faintly. "And now I know it's the only strength that matters." For the first time in months, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of a lady performing composure, but one born of quiet joy. He brushed his thumb over her knuckles, and in the stillness that followed, it felt as if the world itself had paused to bear witness. The chapel bell in the distance chimed the hour. The sound rolled softly across the gardens. Evelyn looked up at him, her heart steady now. "Adrian," she said gently, "if we are to begin again, let it not be as strangers made dutiful by law, but as souls who choose one another." He bowed his head slightly, emotion thick in his throat. "Then I choose you, now, and for whatever time remains to me." Her tears spilled, bright and unashamed. "And I you." The distance closed between them, not in haste, but with the quiet certainty of two hearts finding their way home. When he kissed her, softly, reverently, as if afraid to break the spell, it was not passion that spoke first, but peace. The kind that comes only after forgiveness. The wind stirred through the roses, scattering petals at their feet. The world seemed to exhale. Later, as they walked hand in hand toward the manor, Evelyn glanced toward the horizon, the clouds breaking into gold. "Strange," she murmured, "how love survives its own silence." Adrian smiled, his thumb tracing circles over her hand. "It does more than survive," he said quietly. "It waits until we are brave enough to listen." And as they stepped through the sunlight together, the house that once held their distance now felt like a home reborn, not through duty, but through love freely chosen and hearts that finally learned to speak.